The first words my son spoke to me in 3 months, he spoke through his lawyer. Mrs. Coleman can no longer remember the names of her own grandchildren. Bradford Lyle let it sit there under that flat, blue-white courtroom light, the kind of light they use in rooms where people come to lose things. Somewhere behind me, a stranger breathed out a soft, pitying sound, the kind you'd make at a stray dog in the rain. And my son Curtis sat at the table 8 feet away with his shoulders curled in like a boy waiting to be hit, and he stared at the grain of the wood, and he did not look at me. So I stood up. My chair scraped hard against the stone loud as a slap. The bailiff shifted his weight toward me. I wasn't going anywhere, I just wanted my son to watch me do it. To watch me rise steady on my own 2 feet in front of the whole room that had been told I couldn't. Curtis. His name came out of me quiet, and he flinched like I'd thrown it at him. Look at your mother. He didn't. He couldn't. But Renee could. My son's wife leaned across him, and under her breath, just for me, she gave me the cruelest true thing she had. You're going to die alone in this city, Sophie. Is that really what you want? And God forgive me, I leaned right back, and I gave her the cruelest true thing I had. Better to die alone, Renee, than to live the rest of your life as the woman who taught my granddaughter how to do this to me. The gallery went still. Lyle's smile slipped. The judge cracked her gavel once. Ma'am, you will sit down. And I did. Calmly. I smoothed my plum-colored skirt. I set my purse in my lap, and I folded my hands on top of it. And inside that purse, my late husband's watch ticked against the leather, like it was keeping time on all of them. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that because everything that came after depends on it. I didn't cry, and I didn't shake. I just sat there and did the thing I have always done best. I counted. I have taught 6th grade reading for 40 years. I have heard 10,000 children try to talk their way out of a book they never opened. I know the exact sound a sentence makes when it's been built board by board to fool you. And I sat in that cold blue light, and I counted every lie as it left their mouths, and I waited. Because they had come for my house. They had come for my money. And this was the part they were proudest of. They had come for my mind. They never once thought to check the one thing I'd kept all along. My name is Sophie Coleman, and for 40 years I kept a notebook. Not a diary. A roll call book, the green kind with the cloth spine, the kind they stopped making sometime around 1995. So I bought up 6 of them from a shop on Greer Street before they were gone. Every child who ever sat in my classroom went into that book. And next to each name in the margin, I wrote one thing. Not a grade. One true thing. Afraid to read out loud. No one picks him up after school. Pretends she can't, so no one expects her to. Smart and angry that nobody noticed yet. I have spent my whole life counting other people's children. The ones the system lost. The ones who came to my room with their coats still on because nobody had taught them they were allowed to stay. Some of them I fed. A few of them I took home. One of them I raised. I'll tell you about her later. She matters more than you'd think, and the people sitting across that aisle had no idea she existed. That notebook is the most valuable thing I own. I want you to remember that, because the men in that courtroom were absolutely certain the most valuable thing I owned was a house. Curtis was the kind of boy who hid under the kitchen table when it thundered. He'd fold himself up under there with his knees against his chest, and I'd get down on the floor. I could still get down on the floor back then, and I'd tell him a story until the sky quieted. I didn't tell him not to be afraid. I told him I'd stay until it passed. That's a different promise, and children know the difference. His father, Walter, and I were not people with money. There were winters we ate around Curtis so that Curtis could eat. The year he was 9, he needed new shoes for school, and we didn't have it, so Walter sold his good watch and bought the shoes, and Curtis wore them proud as a king and never knew. Walter just said his wrist felt lighter. He smiled when he said it. The day Curtis graduated, he found me in the crowd before he found anybody else. He was still in that gown, the cap crooked, and he wrapped me up in his arms and put his mouth against my ear so I could hear him over all the noise. "You're never going to have to worry, Mama," he said. Not ever. I've got you now. I believed him. That's not his crime. Lots of boys say that and mean it. The crime came later, and it came slow, and by the time I saw it clearly, it had already learned how to wear my son's face. People hear retired school teacher, and they picture something soft. A lady with a cardigan and a coffee mug handing out gold stars. Let me correct that picture because the men in that courtroom were working off the same one, and it cost them. For 40 years, I taught the grade nobody wants sixth. 11 and 12 years old, the age where a child decides more or less for good whether the world is a place that will catch them or a place that will let them fall. I taught in a building where the ceiling leaked into a trash can in the corner of room 114 every time it rained, and we all just learned the rhythm of that drip and kept reading over it. I bought my own paperbacks out of my own check because the district's idea of a library was a locked cart. I learned the name of every child by the end of the first week, and I learned the one true thing about each of them by the end of the first month, because you cannot teach a child to read until you know what they're so busy hiding that they've got no attention left over for the page. There was a boy named Deshaun the year I was 31 who would not read out loud to save his life. The other teachers had him marked slow. He wasn't slow. He had a stutter and an older brother who imitated it, and he had decided that silence was safer than being laughed at, which is a perfectly logical decision for a boy who has been laughed at. It took me until February. I caught him one afternoon reading to the class Hamster when he thought the room was empty, smooth as a radio announcer because the hamster wasn't going to laugh. So the next day, I sent every other child out to lunch 2 minutes early, and I said, "Deshaun, it's just me and the hamster in here. Read me one page." And he did. By spring, he read to the whole class stutter, and all daring a single soul to make a sound. None of them did. Children know courage when they see it. I tell you about Deshaun because that is the woman Gerald Pruitt called confused. I have spent my life reading the thing a person is hiding underneath the thing they're saying. It is more or less my only real talent. And a man who builds his whole scheme on a lie is to me just a frightened boy reading badly to a room he assumes can't tell. Walter understood that about me. Walter, who sold his good watch the year Curtis needed shoes, and told us both his wrist felt lighter. He used to sit at the kitchen table while I graded, not saying much, just keeping me company in that way good men do. And once I must have been complaining about a parent who wouldn't show up for a conference. He put down his coffee and said, "Sophie, you keep a book on every child in that school. One day somebody's going to come for you, and they're going to find out you've been keeping a book the whole time." He laughed when he said it. He thought he was teasing. He was 4 years in the ground before I understood he'd given me a prophecy. Walter died 4 years ago. A pocket watch, a cheap one, not the one he sold all those years back, was the only thing of his I kept on me. I wound it every morning. I still do. It sat in my purse in that courtroom ticking against the leather, while Bradford Lyle explained to a judge that I was losing my mind. About 14 months ago, Curtis's little girl got sick. Truly sick, the kind with a hospital wing and a word you have to look up. By the time it was over, she was alive, thank God, and the bills came to $86,000. I would have given every cent I had. I told Curtis that. I meant it. That's when the man arrived. Gerald Pruitt came to my son wearing the word help, like cologne. He had a business card that said he protected black families from losing generational wealth. That was the phrase, generational wealth. And he had a soft voice and a firm handshake and a folder full of other people's success stories. What he actually wanted was my street. You have to understand Delaney Street. We bought our house there when it was the only place that would sell to us, and we stayed when it was the only place that felt like ours. And now there are coffee shops with one-word names, and the houses 2 doors down sell for numbers that don't sound real. A house on Delaney Street is worth a great deal of money to a man like Gerald Pruitt. A confused old widow on Delaney Street is worth even more. One morning 3 months ago, I opened my mailbox and found a letter from the county court. My son had filed a petition to take control of me, of my money, my house, my medical decisions, my name. Attached was a doctor's assessment, a Dr. Alan Reeves, a man I had met exactly once, declaring that Sophie Coleman was no longer competent to manage her own affairs. Here is the part they got wrong. I was not confused. I had not been confused for one single day. And 8 months before that letter ever came, I had already felt the cold coming off these people the way you feel weather before it breaks. So I did a quiet thing. I started keeping more than receipts. I kept records. I kept statements and pharmacy logs and dates, and where the law in my state allowed it, I kept recordings. I let them go on believing I was a sweet old fool who couldn't work her own phone. I let them underestimate me on purpose. For 8 months, I wore the face they wanted to see, and behind it, I built my own quiet caseboard by board the way they built their lies, except mine was true. I want to tell you how it actually feels to figure out your own child is being turned against you, because it does not happen the way it does in the movies. There's no single terrible moment. It comes the way rot comes to a porch board, soft, slow, and you don't believe it until the day your foot goes through. For me, it was a bank statement. 8 months before the court letter, I was balancing my accounts at the kitchen table the way I have on the first of every month for 50 years, and a transfer was there that I had not made. Not a large one. $300 to an account I didn't recognize with my own name on the authorization. A small thing, the kind of thing a confused old woman wouldn't notice. I noticed. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront a soul. That was the hardest discipline of my life, harder than any classroom to see the rot and not cry out, because the second they knew I could see it, they'd move faster than I could. So I did the only thing a 6th grade teacher really knows how to do. I started keeping records. I bought a cheap notebook, not the green one, that one's sacred, and I wrote down every strange transaction with its date. I went to the pharmacy and quietly asked for a printed history of every prescription I'd filled, and every one I supposedly hadn't, and I kept the log because I'd begun to notice my pills moved when I'd had visitors. I saved my mail, what mail still reached me, and I started to notice which letters never came at all. And on the little smartphone Curtis had set up for me himself, laughing the whole time about how Mama would never figure it out, I learned to do one thing very well. I learned how to press record and how to lay the phone face down on the kitchen table beside the sugar bowl, and how to keep my face exactly as foolish as they needed it to be. I checked the law first. I sat in the public library for a whole afternoon with a reference librarian named Gloria, and we read the statute together until I understood it cold. One party to the conversation has to consent, and in my kitchen, the one party was me. I consented. I have never in my life broken a rule I didn't first read all the way to the end. There was an afternoon it nearly came apart. Renee was over. She came more near the end, not less, which I should have understood sooner, and she picked up my phone off the table to charge it for me, Mama. And the screen was warm, and I watched her thumb hover over it for one endless second. I did the only thing I could think of. I knocked my own teacup off the table. It shattered on the floor, and she startled and set the phone down to help me, clucking the whole time about how I'd gotten so clumsy lately, and she said the word like a gift she was giving herself. Clumsy. I got down on my knees on my own kitchen floor and picked up the pieces of Walter's mother's china, and I let her watch me do it, and I thought, count it, Sophie. Count this one, too. That same season I'd had surgery. I called it an old woman's plumbing to anyone who asked, because that's easier to say than the truth. The truth is, they'd warned me in the careful voices doctors use that a woman my age doesn't always come back up off that table. 4 hours under, they told me afterward. It was closer than I let on to a single soul. And when they sent me home from Mercy General, they cut the plastic band off my wrist, and I almost dropped it in the bin. Then some instinct I still can't fully explain made me keep it instead, that little band with the date stamped on it, and I dropped it in the drawer with the rubber bands and the takeout menus and forgot about it. I want you to remember that wristband. I had no idea the day I kept it that it would one day be the thing that broke a forger in open court. I just had a lifetime's habit of keeping the small, true record of where I'd actually been. That's what I did in the quiet for 8 months while they told each other I was fading. I built a file, calm and dated and true. They thought the silence around me was decline. It was patience. I tried to do it the soft way first. I owed Curtis that much, or I owed the boy under the table that much. I'm still not sure which. I invited him to the house. I made coffee in the good cups. I laid the bank statements out on the kitchen table where he used to do his homework, and I asked him plainly to tell me what was happening. He wouldn't sit down. He stood by the door with his coat still on, same as those children all those years ago, and he looked at the floor and he said, "You don't understand, Mama." His wife understood me fine. Renee called me that night. She told me there were facilities that could keep me safe, and she said the word safe the way you'd hold a knife you wanted me to see. I hung up the phone. I sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long time, and then I went down the hall and I took out my notebook, the green one with the cloth spine, and I turned the pages and I read the names. All those children, all those margins, afraid to read out loud. Pretends she can't so no one expects her to. I had spent 40 years teaching frightened children how to stand up in a room full of people who'd already decided they were nothing. I closed the book. The next morning I put on a clean blouse and I drove myself. No help, no confusion to a legal aid office downtown. And I sat in a plastic chair until a young attorney named Denise Ford could see me. They say I can't be trusted to remember my own life, I told her. I'd like to remember it out loud, in front of a judge. Denise Ford could not have been more than 32. She had a stack of other people's tragedies on one corner of her desk and a jar of peppermints on the other that nobody ever touched. And when I finished telling her my story, she did not gasp or take my hand. I appreciated that. She just looked at me for a long moment over the top of her glasses. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm going to be honest with you, because you're old enough that lying to you would be an insult." She tapped the doctor's letter. "Conservatorship courts are built to err on the side of protecting the elderly. That's a good instinct most of the time. It means the judge starts the day already half leaning their way. You walk in already losing, and they have a physician's assessment with your name on it. Right now on paper we lose. Then we'll have to do it off paper," I said. The smallest smile. "What have you got off paper?" I told her. The statements, the dates, the pharmacy logs, and the recordings, the ones I'd been quietly making for 8 months on the little phone Curtis was so sure I couldn't operate. She went very still. "Sophie, recordings of who's saying what, and did the other person know they were being recorded?" "No," I said, "they had no idea." "Then I need to know exactly where you were sitting when you made them, because in some states that's a crime and it'd get thrown out and might land you in trouble." She was already pulling a thick book toward her. "I made every one of them in my own kitchen in this state," I said. "I checked the law before I ever pressed record. One-party consent. I'm the one party. I consented to myself." She stopped. She looked at me. Really looked the way you look at a person you've just badly underestimated. And she set the book back down. "You checked the recording statute," she said slowly, "before you started." I taught children to read the fine print, Ms. Ford. I wasn't going to be the old fool who forgot to read her own. It was the first time I saw her believe me. Not pity me. Believe me. The settlement offer came 2 days later, hand-delivered. Gerald Pruitt's people. If I signed over management of my assets voluntarily, the letter said what a word I could keep living in my house for the remainder of my natural life. Generous. They'd even pay my taxes. I read it twice. Then I had Denise send back 4 words. "My mind's not for sale." Gerald Pruitt came to my porch in person the Sunday after that. I think the 4 words had insulted him. Men like him can absorb a lawyer. What they can't abide is a no that sounds like it came from a person they'd already filed away as furniture. He brought a coffee for me. That was the touch I remember. He held it out like a peace offering, 2 sugars, the way you'd bring it to someone you'd been studying. I didn't take it. I left it sitting on the rail between us, going cold the whole time he talked. He was good the way the dangerous ones are good. He sat in Walter's chair without asking, and he talked to me like a friend who'd come to deliver hard news for my own sake. He told me the neighborhood was changing whether I liked it or not. He told me houses like mine were going to be taken one way or another by the taxes, by the developers, by time itself, and that the only choice an old woman really had was who took it and how gentle they were about it. "I'm not the wolf, Sophie," he said. "I'm the man who shows up before the wolf and makes sure you're comfortable." He actually believed it. That's the thing people get wrong about men like Gerald Pruitt. They think such a man knows he's a villain. He doesn't. He thinks he's a service. He thinks the predator is the market, and he's just the kind face it sends ahead. Then, when none of it moved me, the kindness thinned out, and I saw what was underneath. "You're going to make your son testify against his own mother," he said softly, leaning in. "You understand that Curtis is in this up to his neck now. You take me to court, you take him too. A boy with a sick child and no money dragged through a fraud case." He let that hang. "I'd hate for your stubbornness to be the thing that finishes him. All of this could just go away. Signing the boys clean and you keep your bed by the window. That's not a threat. That's me being the kindest man you're going to meet in this whole business." It was, of course, a threat. The best ones always come dressed as concern. I looked at him for the long moment, and then I did the only thing that ever truly unsettles a man like that. I smiled at him the way I used to smile at a sixth grader who'd handed me a forged hall pass and was very proud of the signature. "Mr. Pruitt," I said, "I have spent 40 years across a desk from children who lied to me with a great deal more talent than you've got. You're not the first man to sit in my husband's chair and explain to me very gently that I have no choices. You're just the first one I'm going to outlive in court." I stood up, which meant he had to stand up. "Take your coffee. I don't drink it from strangers, and that's all you are. You came to my porch thinking you were visiting furniture. You'll find out in that courtroom you were visiting the teacher." His jaw worked. For 1 second, the soft hands were still, and something cold looked out at me, and I understood I had made a real enemy and not just a greedy one. Then he gathered the coffee and the smile back up, and he went down my steps, and at the bottom he turned. "They never believed the old ones," he said. "That's the whole business, Sophie. You can be right as rain. Nobody listens to a confused old woman." "Then it's a good thing," I said, "that I was never confused." I watched his car until it turned the corner. Then I went inside, and my hands were shaking, and I let them shake. And then I sat down at my kitchen table where the file was, and I got back to work. He'd given me something walking up those steps in person. He'd shown me he was scared. A man who'd already won doesn't bring you coffee. They took Zoe from me first. That's how you can always tell the people who know they're in the wrong. They get the children away from the witness. Zoe is 15. She is Curtis's girl, the one whose hospital bills started all of this, and she is the only one of them who never learned how to look through me. For months she'd been texting me on the sly "You okay, Grandma, did you eat?" And then 1 week, nothing. When I finally got her on the phone, she was whispering. Her mother had told her I was sick in the head, and that talking to me would only confuse me worse. She'd taken Zoe's phone twice. "I'm not allowed," Zoe breathed. "Grandma, I'm so sorry I'm not allowed." That was the cruelest part of the whole machine and the most clever. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about being old and alone. They don't have to prove you're confused. They only have to make you isolated, and then loneliness does the rest. Cut off the phone calls. Lose the mail. Move the pill bottles 2 inches and let the worried looks pile up. A woman with no one to call and no letters coming, and her own family murmuring she's slipping, will start to look exactly like a woman who's slipping even while her mind is sharp as a tack. They weren't documenting my decline. They were building it. I sat in my kitchen the night I understood that, and I have never in my life felt so close to giving up. The house was so quiet, I could hear the watch ticking in the next room. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, when there was no soft way left to talk myself out of it, I picked up the phone and I made the one call I'd been saving for 30 years. I want to tell you about the girl I raised. She came to my classroom at 9 years old with her coat zipped to her chin and a folder that said she'd been in 4 homes in 2 years. She wouldn't read out loud. Pretends she can't so no one expects her to. That was the line I wrote in the margin next to her name. It took me a whole winter to find out she could read better than children twice her age. She'd just learned that the less you showed people, the less they could take. Walter and I took her in that spring. We raised her right alongside Curtis. She grew up and she got out and she built a whole big life far away from this city, the kind of life I'm not allowed to brag about as much as I'd like to, but I'll get to that. We drifted the way grown children and old mothers do. I hadn't asked her for a single thing in 15 years. The phone rang twice. Mama. Her voice cracked with sleep and then with fear because a 2 a.m. call from your old mother is never good news. Mama, what's wrong? I told her everything. The house, Curtis, Pruitt, the doctor's letter, the word facility. I told it plain and I did not cry. And when I was done, there was a long silence on the line. And then I heard her breathing change the way it used to when she was small and had decided something. Don't you sign anything, she said. Don't you say one more word to any of them. I'm getting on a plane. Baby, you have a life. You can't just... Mama. And there it was, that voice I gave her, the one I spent a whole winter teaching her she was allowed to use. You taught a scared little girl how to stand up in a room full of people who decided she was nothing. Now you sit down and let me come stand up for you. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in 3 months, I slept. Imani's plane got in the evening before trial, and she came straight to my kitchen and stopped dead in the doorway because the kitchen had become something else by then. My whole life's worth of small, honest records was laid out across that table in rows. Bank statements clipped by month. The pharmacy logs. A legal pad where I'd written in my school teacher's hand every staged incident with the real story beside it. The little phone with its 8 months of recordings. And in the center where I could see it while I worked the green notebook. Mama, she said very quiet, taking it in. How long have you been building this? Since the $300, I said. 8 months. I watched her do the math on her face. I needed it to look like I wasn't looking. The day they found out I could see they'd have moved faster than the law could. She sat down across from me, the grown doctor, and the scared 9-year-old both at once, and she put her hand flat on the table over all those careful pages, and she said the thing I needed and hadn't let myself want. You did everything right. Everything. You out-taught the whole rotten lot of them. Then her voice went small. I should have called more. I should have known. You knew when it counted, I said. Sit up, we have work. Denise came at 8, and the 3 of us went through it until past midnight. What they'd ask, how they'd try to rattle me. The questions built to make me hurry and stumble. Denise played Lyle, snapping questions fast and mean across my own kitchen table. And Imani sat beside me with a doctor's calm and taught me the one thing that would matter most: take your time. Confusion isn't slowness. Slowness in an old woman is just dignity that refuses to be rushed. Make them wait for you. There was a moment near the end when it all caught up with me. Denise had asked in Lyle's cruel voice, "Do you even understand what your son tried to do to you?" just to prepare me for it. And the question went in somewhere the file couldn't reach, and I had to put my hand over my mouth. My own boy, the one who hid under this very table. I sat in my kitchen with everyone I had left, and I came for just a minute all the way undone. Imani didn't tell me not to cry. She'd learned from the best. She knew that's a lie children see through. She just pulled her chair close and said, "It's a storm, Mama. We'll stay till it passes." My own words come back to carry me, and they did. The storm passed the way they do when somebody stays, and I wiped my face and squared the pages and said again, "Ask me again. I'll be ready this time." And I was. When they finally left me to sleep, I stood alone in my kitchen and looked at that table, the war room of a woman nobody had expected to fight, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I had something they'd never once thought to check. I woke before the alarm the way you do on the days that decide things. I made coffee in the small pot 1 cup. I ran a bath and I sat in it until the water went cool. And then I dressed slowly with intention the way you dress when you're about to walk into a room that's already made up its mind about you. The plum suit, the good shoes, real shoes with a heel, because a woman they've called feeble should make them watch her cross a room. I pinned Walter's watch chain inside my purse where I could feel it wound at once and listen to it catch and start. Denise had warned me they'd be there early, and they were. I saw them from across the courthouse plaza before they saw me, Curtis, and Renee, and behind them, paying for all of it, the soft-handed man himself, Gerald Pruitt, in a gray suit, the color of wet concrete. Curtis looked up. For 1 second, across all that distance, my son's eyes found mine. He was thinner than I remembered. There were hollows under his eyes that I had not put there and could not fix. For 1 second, he looked at me the way he used to look up from under the kitchen table, waiting for me to tell him the storm would pass. And then Renee touched his arm and he turned his face away, and the second was gone. I did not chase it. I had spent 3 months chasing that boy. I climbed the courthouse steps on my own 2 feet in my real shoes with my dead husband's watch ticking against my hip, and I walked into the cold blue light to take back my name. After the judge had quieted me and I'd folded my hands back over my purse, Bradford Lyle smoothed his tie and began to tell the room who I was. He was good. I'll give him that. He didn't call me crazy, that's the amateur's mistake. He called me beloved. He said the word so warmly that 2 jurors' faces went soft. He spoke of a proud woman who had given her whole life to children, and of the heartbreak. The heartbreak, Your Honor, of a devoted son forced to watch that great mind slowly go dark. He said Curtis hadn't come to take anything from his mother. He'd come to carry her. He was a son doing the hardest thing a son can do. It was a beautiful story. I had taught 40 years of children to spot exactly this, a paragraph that's grammatically perfect and completely false. The trouble is, a jury is just 30 children who never had me for a teacher. I watched them lean toward him, and I felt the floor of that room tilt very slightly away from me. Denise had told me they start the day already half leaning their way. I felt it now. It is one thing to be told the hill is steep. It is another to stand at the bottom and look up. They called Dr. Alan Reeves first. He was crisp. He had a tablet and a laser pointer and a chart of my cognitive markers. And he used words like executive function and short-term recall deficit until the jury stopped listening to the meaning and started just trusting the music of it. He testified that in his professional judgment, Sophie Coleman could no longer safely manage her own affairs. Then Denise stood up, and I watched a young woman in a $40 blazer take him apart with a wristwatch. Dr. Reeves, how long did you spend with my client? A thorough examination. That's not a length of time. I have your own billing record. Read the room number you used and the timestamps. A pause. The session was approximately 19 minutes. 19 minutes. She let it sit. You determined that a woman who managed a classroom, a household, and her own finances for 64 years was incompetent in less time than it takes to get an oil change. Was any family member present a neutral party? Anyone who knows her to say, yes, that's not how she usually is. It's not standard to, so that would be a no. She wasn't done. She picked up his own report and held it the way you hold something that smells. Dr. Reeves, the instrument you used. Tell the court its name. The Mini Mental State Examination. A screening tool. Yes or no is the MMSE on its own sufficient to declare a person legally incompetent? I'm quoting the test's own published guidance now. A long pause. On its own, no. It's meant to be one part of a fuller picture. And you've already told us your fuller picture was 19 minutes with no records and no one who knows her. Did you perform any functional assessment? Did you watch her balance a checkbook, take her medication, place a phone call, any of the things this petition claims she can't do? There wasn't time. No, there wasn't. Denise turned a page. Let's talk about how you scored her. You marked Mrs. Coleman as tangential and confused on the orientation section. Do you have your notes? Read the court what she said when you asked her what year it was. Reeves found it. His voice got quieter. She said it's the year my son decided I'd become a problem. The gallery made a sound. Denise let it breathe. That's the correct year, isn't it, Doctor? She knew the year exactly. She answered you with a joke. A sad, sharp, completely lucid joke about her own situation, and you wrote down confused. Denise set the page on the rail. You sat across from one of the quickest minds in this county, and you couldn't tell the difference between dementia and a woman being smarter than you in the room. That's not a finding about her memory, Dr. Reeves. It's a finding about your ear. I watched it land on the jury. I had spent my whole life as the kind of woman whose wit gets read as decline. Isn't she a pistol? Isn't she a character? And every gray head in that gallery knew the feeling of saying something true and watching a younger person decide you were addled for saying it. They knew. I could see them knowing. Denise let the room hold all of it for a moment. Then she did the thing I'll remember for the rest of my life. She asked almost gently, Dr. Reeves, who refers most of your competency cases to you. For the first time, the crispness left him. I receive referrals from a number of sources. Do you receive a consulting fee from an entity called Heritage Senior Solutions? The room changed. I felt Pruitt go rigid 2 rows behind me without even turning around. Objection. Lyle was on his feet too fast. Relevance. Counsel is fishing. Your Honor, I'm establishing. Sustained. Move on, counsel. The judge's voice was flat, but her eyes had sharpened, and I saw her write something down. The seed was in the ground. Denise had not been allowed to water it. Not yet. She sat back down beside me and breathed out very slowly through her nose. We'll get there this afternoon, she whispered, if they let us live that long. Then Lyle called Curtis to the stand and the bottom of the world fell out. My son took the oath with his hand not quite steady. He sat. He still would not look at me. He looked at a spot just over my left shoulder, the way you look at a thing you've practiced not flinching at. And when Lyle asked him to tell the court in his own words what he had seen, my son began to recite. That's the word. Recite. Flat, careful, every sentence laid down end to end like a path somebody else had paved for him. She forgets things. She left the stove on. She got lost coming home from the store she shopped at for 30 years. Last month, she couldn't remember my daughter's name. I knew those stories. I knew them because I had lived the truth of every one. The stove that Renee turned back on after I'd left the kitchen. The lost afternoon I spent at a bus stop because someone had quietly canceled my ride and let me wait. The pill bottles moved. He was reading my own staged execution back to me, and from the careful, dead-level sound of his voice, I understood something that hurt worse than any lie he didn't believe most of it either. He had memorized it. A man only flattens his voice like that when he's afraid that if he lets the feeling in the whole thing will come apart. And once, just once, it almost did. And the name your daughter says she couldn't remember, Lyle prompted. Whose name was that? Zoe, Curtis said. And on that one word on his own child's name, my son's voice cracked clean down the middle. And for half a second, the boy under the kitchen table looked out at me through a grown man's ruined face. I almost stood up again, not in anger, to go to him. God help me after everything my body still tried to rise and cross that room and tell him the storm would pass. That was the moment Renee chose. She was sitting in the gallery with Zoe beside her. Zoe who had found a way to come, and the instant my granddaughter leaned forward at the sound of her own name in her father's broken voice, Renee took her by the arm and stood and walked her out. Zoe looked back at me the whole way. The big courtroom door swung shut behind them with a sound like a sentence ending. A period. Full stop. The end of something. Curtis put his head down. The judge called the lunch recess, and the room emptied out around me until it was just me and Denise and the hum of that cold blue light, and Denise didn't reach for her notes. She turned her chair to face me, and she said the thing a good lawyer says when she respects you too much to lie. Sophie, I have to be straight with you. The doctor hurt us less than your son just did. Juries forgive a paid expert. They don't forget a son crying on the stand. Right now in that room we are losing. If we walk back in there this afternoon with nothing bigger than what we've got, I think they take your house, and I think they take your name. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. I reached into my purse, past the folder, past everything, and I closed my hand around Walter's watch. It was still ticking. After everything, it was still keeping its small, stubborn time against my palm, the way he'd wound it every morning, the way I'd wound it that very dawn. I'll stay until it passes. That's the promise. Not don't be afraid. That one's a lie, and children know it. The true one is harder. I sat alone in that emptied room, and I held on to the last warm thing my husband ever touched, and for the length of one lunch hour, I let myself be exactly as afraid as I was. And then I let it pass. When court came back in, Denise stood and said, "The respondent calls Dr. Imani Brooks." I heard Pruitt shift behind me. I heard Lyle murmur to Curtis, who, because that was the whole point. They had built a case on a woman with nobody left. They had counted the empty chairs in my life and decided I had no one. They never knew to ask about the girl who came to my classroom at 9 years old with her coat zipped to her chin. The doors opened and she walked in. She was tall, and she was calm, and she was wearing the kind of plain dark suit that serious people wear. And she did not look at Curtis, or at Renee, or at the man in the wet concrete suit. She looked at me just once the way she used to look up from a book when she'd gotten a hard word right and wanted to make sure I'd seen. Then she took the stand and stated her name for the record. Dr. Imani Brooks. Dr. Brooks, what is your field? Geriatric medicine. A small pause that landed on the room like a dropped plate. I'm a board-certified specialist in cognitive assessment of older adults. I've performed or supervised roughly 4,000 competency evaluations. I direct the geriatric unit at a teaching hospital. She let it settle. Assessing whether an older person has lost capacity is quite literally the thing I do. I watched it travel across their faces. Lyle's pen stopped. Dr. Reeves in the second row went the color of paper. Because the woman they'd dressed up as a friendless, fading old fool had raised with her own 2 hands one of the most qualified people in that entire building to say otherwise. Denise asked her to review Reeves' assessment. Imani did it the way a surgeon describes a wound, no anger, no flourish, which is exactly what made it merciless. 19 minutes. No collateral history, no functional testing. A screening tool used wrong and scored wrong. If a resident of mine submitted this, she said evenly, I would not sign it. I would send them back to do their job. Then Denise asked one last question. Dr. Brooks, you've examined thousands of people for memory loss. In your professional opinion, does Sophie Coleman forget things? And for the first time, my girl let the cold drop just a little, just enough. This woman taught me to read when 4 foster homes had already written me off as unteachable. She remembers the name of every child she ever taught. She remembers the margin note she wrote beside mine. Her voice stayed level, but her eyes did not. Remembering people is the thing she has never once failed to do. It's the best thing about her. You'll have to find another lie. The room did not make a sound. Denise did not sit down. She let the silence work, and then she said, Your Honor, the respondent moves to its counterclaim. We allege this conservatorship is the instrument of a fraud, and we can prove the fraud with one piece of paper the petitioners themselves filed. She held it up. The power of attorney. The document Pruitt's people had been waving since the first week, the one that said Sophie Coleman had voluntarily signed control of her property over to a manager. Signed, notarized, and dated. The petitioners have built their case on my client's signature on this instrument dated October 14th of last year. Denise walked it to the clerk. I'd now like to enter the certified admission and surgical records from Mercy General Hospital, also dated October 14th of last year. She turned to the room. On the day this document claims Sophie Coleman calmly sat in an office and signed away her life, Sophie Coleman was on an operating table, under general anesthesia, for 4 hours. She has the surgical record, the recovery notes, and Denise held up a photograph, the hospital wristband which she kept with that date printed on it. She could not have signed this. No one with her name signed this. This signature is forged, and every single thing these people have told you flows from it. Lyle was up, Your Honor. But the floor was already gone from under them, and everyone in that room could feel it go. There's more, Denise said. My client lives in a one-party consent state. She is permitted to record her own conversations. 8 months ago, she began to. She looked at the judge. With the court's permission. The judge's eyes were very hard now, and they were not aimed at me. Play it. It was Pruitt's voice. Tinny small filling that enormous room. You don't need her, declared Crazy Curtis. You just need her to look it. Couple of incidents, a doctor's note, a sad story on the stand. Judges want to protect the old ones. Let them. And then the part that took the air out of the gallery, Pruitt's voice, easy and bored. Relax. This isn't my first house on that street. The grandmother on Lenox didn't fight either. The grandmother on Lenox. He hadn't meant to be a confession. He'd meant to be reassurance. But there it was, not my first, and a clerk somewhere in that building had a file on Lenox Avenue, and everyone in the room understood at the same moment that they were not looking at a family tragedy. They were looking at a man who did this for a living in our neighborhood, to women who looked like me. Pruitt stood up. That was his mistake. This is a setup, he said too loud to no one, and the soft hands were fists now. She doesn't understand what she's... Mr. Pruitt, the judge's gavel. Sit down or you'll be removed and detained. He sat, but the gray suit had nothing left in it, and Curtis was staring at his mother now. Finally, looking right at me with his whole ruined face as the size of what he'd been handed and what he'd done with it arrived in him all at once. I asked Denise to let me testify. She didn't want to. She said we'd already won the law. The rest was just risk. I told her the law was never the part I came for. I took the oath. I sat where my son had sat. And Bradford Lyle, who had nothing left but the hope of breaking me in front of the room, came at me fast, because a flustered old woman was the only client he had left. Mrs. Coleman, your grandchildren's birthdays quickly. March 3rd, November 19th, July 8th. Your medications. I named them, the doses too. The balance of your checking account to the dollar, I told him. He blinked. He was trying to make me stumble in front of them, and the harder he pushed, the steadier I got, because I have been pushed by experts, by principals and landlords, and men in gray suits my whole long life. And I learned a long time ago that the trick is not to hurry. I did not hurry. I did not shake. I did not cry. And when he saw none of it was working, he did the desperate thing, the cruel thing, the thing he thought would finally crack me open. He leaned in. Mrs. Coleman, do you even understand what your own son tried to do to you? The room went still. Denise's hand tightened. I think the whole gallery thought I would finally break. I looked at Lyle for a moment. Then I looked past him at Curtis for the first time since I'd told him to look at me, and he couldn't. I have counted other people's children for 40 years, Mr. Lyle. My voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Frightened ones. Forgotten ones. I kept a book with every one of their names in it. You truly believe I forgot how to count my own? Nobody moved. I understand exactly what was done to me. I understood it 8 months before any of you. The question that should be keeping this room awake is not whether I remember my grandchildren's names. I turned fully to the judge. It's why a man who does this for a living was allowed to walk into a hospital, forge a dying woman's signature because I was dying on that table. They just bet wrong and dress it up as a son's love. That's the crime. Curtis didn't invent it. Curtis got handed $86,000 of his sick child's hospital bills, and a man with a soft voice who told him the way out was through his mother. and here is where I stopped. Because Denise had told me that morning that I had more than enough to send Curtis to prison right alongside Gerald Pruitt. The forged document carried his cooperation. I could close my hand and end my son. I sat in that witness chair with it sitting in my open palm, and I will not pretend to you that it was easy. I will not pretend I didn't feel the pull of every cruel thing they'd done. I let myself want it for one long, ugly breath. Then I let it pass. The way you let a storm pass. The way I'd promised a boy under a kitchen table I always would. I'm not asking this court to put my son in a cell, I said. I'm asking it to put the right man in one. My son owes a debt. He'll pay it the slow way, the true way, by telling every bit of the truth about Gerald Pruitt out loud with his name on it. That's my condition. The whole truth or nothing from me. I drew a breath. And as for my house, the thing all of this was supposed to be about, I almost smiled. They were 3 weeks too slow. I'd already started giving it away. There are papers half finished on my kitchen table this minute, turning that house on Delaney Street into a place where neighborhood children who can't read yet can come and learn a small thing with my husband's name over the door. I was never fighting any of you for the money. I looked at Curtis one last time. I was fighting for the only 2 things I had left that you all decided were already gone. My name and my mind. I'd like them back now. Then I stepped down from the stand, and I did not look at my son. The judge did not take long. She didn't need to. She denied the petition for conservatorship in full. She found on the record that Sophie Coleman was of entirely sound mind, and always had been. Then she did the thing I'll thank God for the rest of my days. She ordered the forged power of attorney, voided referred Gerald Pruitt to the district attorney for forgery, and elder fraud referred Dr. Alan Reeves to the state medical board and the same DA, and instructed the clerk to pull the file on a property on Lenox Avenue and any other house on any other street where a soft-handed man had taught somebody's child that the way out of debt ran through their mother. I didn't cheer. The gallery made noise. I didn't. I just let out one long breath I think I'd been holding for 8 months, and it left me quiet and clean. Some days you carry your own weather. That day, for the first time in a long time, the sky over me was clear. I sat alone in my car in the courthouse lot for a while before I trusted my hands to drive. Then I called the one number I'd been saving. "It's over," I told Imani. She cried. I didn't, but I held the phone to my ear and led her the way you hold a door open. There was a knock on the window. Zoe. She'd run from somewhere out of breath, her mother nowhere in sight, 15 years old, and so afraid I'd drive off before she got to me. She didn't try the handle. She just laid her open hand flat against the glass. I put mine up against hers on the inside. We stayed like that, a pane of glass between 2 people who'd been kept apart, neither one pretending it was already fixed. It wasn't, but her hand was warm even through the cold window, and she'd come alone, and she'd come with clean hands, and that I have learned is the only kind of knock worth opening for. I won't lie to you and make it pretty. That's not how these things end. Curtis was not put into cell. He kept his end of it. He told the whole truth about Gerald Pruitt on the record with his name on it, and it cost him to do it, and it helped put a predator where he belonged. He got a suspended sentence and a long debt and a longer road. He comes to see me on the first Sunday of every month. We are not healed. I want to be honest about that because somebody listening needs to hear that real and healed are not the same word. We are only real now. After years of pretending real is its own kind of mercy. Renee never came. Some doors stay shut and you let them and you stop standing in front of them waiting. The house on Delaney Street became what I'd already started making it, a little reading room with my Walter's name over the door, where neighborhood children who can't sound out the words yet come and learn that they're allowed to stay until it passes. Zoe volunteers there on Saturdays. She's good with the scared ones. She knows the trick you don't tell them not to be afraid. You tell them you'll stay. The Walter Coleman Reading Room opened on a Tuesday because Walter always said Tuesdays were the honest day of the week, No Monday drama, no Friday showing off just work. We didn't have a ribbon. We had a hand-lettered sign Zoe made, and 40 folding chairs I refused to throw out, and the same kind of green cloth-spine notebook on a table by the door open to a blank page waiting for names. The first child through the door was a girl named Tanya, 7 years old, sent by a neighbor because she'd started coming home from school with stomach aches that the doctor couldn't find a cause for. I knew that stomach ache. I'd seen it 100 times in room 114. It's the ache a child gets when they've figured out that tomorrow they'll be asked to read out loud and be found out. She stood in my doorway with her coat zipped to her chin, and Lord, if it wasn't Deshawn all over again, if it wasn't half the children of my whole long life standing in that one small body. I didn't ask her to read. I never do the first day. I asked her to help me sort the books by color because a child who won't read will still happily organize. And while we made a blue pile and a red pile, I told her the only rule of my reading room. Nobody here has to be brave today, I said. Today you just have to stay. Bravery's a Thursday thing. She almost smiled. By her 4th visit, she was reading me the red books slow and fierce, daring me to laugh. I didn't. I never do. Children know courage when they see it, and so do I. Zoe runs the Saturdays group now. She's better at it than I was at her age, which is the whole point of raising anybody you hope they start where you finished. She keeps her own margin notes on the children in her own hand, and I have never told her she learned that from me because she'd get embarrassed and stop. Some lessons you let a child think they invented. And on the first Sunday of every month, my son comes. The first time he came to the reading room instead of my kitchen, he didn't knock. He just stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. A grown man who didn't know if he was allowed inside a room with his own father's name over the door. The ceiling had a leak. Of course it did. Every room I've ever loved has had a leak. Curtis looked up at the brown stain spreading over the corner, and without a word he went out to his truck and came back with a ladder and a bucket of patch, and he spent 3 hours up there, not talking, fixing the roof over the children's heads. We don't say much, Curtis and I. The big conversation, the one with the apology in it, we had once, and we will probably never have again because some things you can only afford to say one time. Mostly he fixes things now. A hinge, a railing, the leak that always comes back. I let him. I have learned that for some people I'm sorry is a sentence they can only speak with their hands. He was a boy who hid under a table when the storm came. He's a man who climbs up on the roof now in the rain to keep it off somebody else. I don't know that I forgive him completely. I know that I watch him up on that ladder, and I feel the thing a mother feels, the stubborn old thing that no court and no lie and no 8 months of silence ever managed to kill, and I let myself feel it, and I don't call it forgiveness, and I don't call it nothing. I wind Walter's watch every morning still. I keep it on the table by the door now next to the notebook where the children can hear it tick while they read. One of them asked me last week why I kept such an old broken-looking thing where everybody could see it. I told her it wasn't broken. I told her it had been keeping time for a man who sold it once to buy his son a pair of shoes and bought it back and wound it every day of his life until the day he couldn't. And that some things you keep going not because they're worth money, but because they're proof that somebody stayed. She thought about that. Then she went back to her book. That's the whole thing, really. That's all I was ever fighting for in that cold blue room. Not the house, not the money, just the right to keep winding the small, true things and to stay and to be counted present when my name was called. On the first warm evening of the spring, I sat out on my porch with the green notebook in my lap, the one with the cloth spine. 40 years of names a true thing written in every margin. I turned to the last page past all those children, and for the first time in my life, I added one more name to the roll, my own. Beside it in the margin, I wrote the truest thing I know how to write about Sophie Coleman. Present, of sound mind. Answered when her name was called. I want to leave you with the thing I learned in that cold blue room, because I think it belongs to more of us than just me. They never actually had to prove I was confused. That's the part that should frighten you. All they had to do was make me alone, take the phone calls, lose the letters, move the pill bottles 2 inches, and let the worried looks pile up, and then let loneliness do the rest. A person with no one to call starts to look exactly like a person who's slipping even when her mind is sharp as a tack. So if there is an old woman or an old man somewhere on the edge of your life, a mother, a neighbor, the lady at the end of the pew, call them. Not because they're fading, because the people who would prey on them are counting very quietly on the silence around them. Your phone call is a witness. Be one. And here is the other thing, the one I'd give my whole self to make you believe. Your worth was never the house or the savings or what you can still do for everyone else. They came for those, and I let most of it go without a fight. What I would not surrender, what no one can take unless you hand it over, was my name and my own mind. Guard those. Say your own name out loud when a room decides it's gone. I forgave my son. Not because he earned it, and not all at once, and not without one ugly breath where I wanted to destroy him instead. Mercy isn't weakness. Mercy is just strength that has decided on purpose what it refuses to become. I'm Sophie Coleman. I'm of sound mind, and I answered when my name was called.